awakening. Have you felt it? You are listening to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie. Good morning, good evening, no matter where you may be. This is your host, Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio, and we are here live at the studio tonight, getting into some very, very, very deep conversations about this COVID-19 situation and the forced destruction of the world economy. It is very interesting about how the world is going about trying to deal with all the things that are happening with this world economy, and it seems to be very intriguing, to say the least. The Federal Reserve has got themselves into a situation here, as well as the United States, Canada, and every other country around the world, as they are being affected by COVID-19. So, again, that's the coronavirus, as some of the people should know, everybody should know. And if you are aware of what's going on, it seems to be quite interesting that this virus has taken, taken off. Could you really say so rapidly or so interestingly? It's very interesting how this virus really did take off. So we're here to talk about it right now. It's kind of crazy. So the destruction of the world economy, forced destruction of the world economy. Let's get into that right now. So you got to talk about the economy and what was going on. So here on Dark Matter Radio, about maybe, I would say about a year and a half ago, we began to start talking about the economy slipping into great shows. We began to start talking about what was happening with the farmers and how the farmers were actually not producing enough or what they were supposed to be producing. So, and how their yields are going way down. We also were talking about the destruction of the dollar and how the dollar was being dumped by everything on the world, right? So by every country on the world, and not every country, but all of the, how can I say, Eastern countries, Russia, Iran, China, we had India also part of that. Pakistan may have been joining in on that as well. We had Brazil going in with that, with Brexit. We had a lot of the country that, it came out to be about maybe almost 48 to 50% of the world's population that were apt to dump the dollar, right? So we reported on that. So we know that the dollar in itself is in a very, very difficult situation. Also, we know that the Federal Reserve, or the reserve gold at Fort Knox, has not been evaluated, I don't think, ever. The last time somebody looked in on it was probably some time back. I believe it was in the 70s or 80s, but there was no real talk about what was actually inside the gold reserves. In fact, all of those things are very much classified, and it is very much under wraps in terms of where the gold is. Some people have decided that there isn't really any gold, and probably the gold was given to Europe and a few other places back in the 70s when Nixon got us off the gold reserve. So, with this coronavirus hysteria sweeping across the globe, it has changed the course of history very, very much. Politicians around the world, the supreme commanders, as I say, of the human race, have shut down the global economy and crashed it. And it is crashing pretty hard. Nothing close to this has ever been seen or witnessed in world history, ever. It is promoted by the media and accepted by the mass media as proper thing to do without the mere mention of the consequences, which are more deadlier than the virus itself. A gaggling and narcissistic, psychopathic, pathological freaks and fools, from the president and prime ministers to the little boys and girls, glorified with titles of honorable, playing governor, mayor, Congress, and any other type of politician you might be able to talk about, giving executive orders to shut down businesses, close the schools, and stay in your house. And again, all in the interest of stopping a virus that seems to be claiming thousands of lives around the globe. Now, the interesting thing about this virus is that it's killing thousands of people. I mean, they may eventually get into right now I think they're into the tens of thousands, and they might even get into the hundreds of thousands. It's to be seen if it's going to get into the millions. And I do believe that this virus is real, as some people think that it's not real, but I do think that this virus is real. I think it did get out of hand, and they're trying to get a hold on it. But, bringing in SWAT teams and keeping you off the streets, bringing in the National Guard to take control. This is one of those Heil Hitler, salute Stalin, marches to, Mussolini, obey Mayo and Merkel and Conte and Johnson and Sanchez and, now Como, the great leader of all, things to be able to help keep people alive. Everybody, it's not a secret anymore. Como was caught lying about the respirators, how he had stockpiles of thousands, and he wasn't giving it to the hospitals, But all they want you to do, they have your best interest in heart. They want you to follow their orders. So the people obey. And if you're not going to go along with them, you are abnormal for not jumping in the bandwagon. So, it is a crazy situation. You're a betrayer if you don't believe in your commander, your governor, or, the pastor that's telling you to go along with a whole bunch of stuff. So, I mean, when you see this, by their needs, you shall know them. It's what the masses will do when a real crisis breaks out, right? Such as a deadly terror or a strike of war. Will they run the store and buy toilet paper before they run for their lives? I don't know. It's kind of crazy. But the Federal Reserve, things are happening behind the scenes as this Great Depression upon us. I'm going to say it is upon us. It's begun. That Great Depression has begun. Main Street and Wall Street have crashed, right? Has crashed. I mean, when you take a look about what was happening back in the 80s, the crash of the 90s and then the crash of the 2008, the stock market dropped 1,500 points, 1,900 points. Here they're dropping, 2,000 points, almost 10,000 points within a month. The Wall Street has crashed. The world has crashed, right? The world is out of work, and the equity markets are out of money. And you know that they're out of money because we were talking about that when we were saying that the Federal Reserve was undercutting the private banking system by almost $1 trillion within a few months to try to keep them afloat because of they ran out of money or liquidity to be able to for banks to borrow from one another. We went into that on Dark Matter Radio in quite detail. So it's pretty crazy when you see that, the world is out of work and the equity markets are out of money. And they are. The stimulus doubled below has never happened before. We are getting to a point where we're pretty much at negative interest rates. I never thought I would see that here in the Western world anyway. Well, I say the Western world, here in the United States and Canada. I didn't think that we would ever see close to negative interest rate. But the Fed, back in, I believe, late January or February, has cut the interest rate to near zero. So this is worse than before. Worse when the Great Depression hit 1930. There were 2 billion people on the planet. There were 2 billion people on the planet in 1930. In just 90 years, we added another 5.7 billion people, many of whom were already out of work, looking to escape the countries that were wrecked by war, poverty, violence, and ravaged by corruption. Thus, the immigration refugee crisis currently existing will escalate into an international catastrophic situation, which is happening right now. Then there is existing homelessness. The crisis will also rapidly escalate, flooding the streets across the globe, work and nowhere to go people of all ages. And tens of millions of human jobs will be lost as robotics and AI rapidly enter the workplace. So, I mean, when we do emerge out of this in several months, God only knows what's really going to happen. But the workforce may never be the same again, and it may never recover. Just like that's like on the economic front, right? The global bubble, well above $250 trillion. There's no way that we can recover from this. And this will crash companies and countries, bring them down to multinational and mom and pop businesses. Nobody is going to get out of what is coming. Nobody is going to get out of what is coming. This is going to be a catastrophic mess on the other side of this, right? And again, nobody is talking about what is going on with the farmers and their yields of corn, their yields of wheat, and their yields of cattle, and all that stuff that's going on over there. We also talk about the pig Ebola, that pig Ebola virus that started again in started again in China, and wrapped its way around the whole entire earth, with over almost 1 billion pigs having to be slaughtered and killed because they were unfit to eat. And this is still having a great impact on the global meat market, because with over 2, maybe 3 billion people over there in China, they no longer have their main source of food, which was the pig market, because the majority of pigs around the earth were killed. This also went into what was going on in Australia, because Australia was hit pretty hard with this pig Ebola, and also with their droughts and the fires, and with a whole lot of culling and killing off of the cattle over there, as well as the downgrade population of the cattle here in the United States and also up in Canada. Nobody's even really talking about that. So, again, with this $2 trillion world debt, nothing's going to get out of the way of this. And within the national debt burdens already in hundreds of trillions, as tax revenues plummet, so too the country's economics, right? And the economies, whose bonds will be worthless, and with loans they will default on. Now, there is a constitutional amendment that the United States has to always pay its debt, right? So in order for them to be able to pay their debt, they're going to have to get rid of almost every single entitlement program that we have coming. So, with this new $6 trillion, promised $6 trillion going out to the people, the debt and the national debt for the United States well above $28 trillion dollars and closing on $30 trillion dollars, if not by this third stimulus package they come out with, is going to topple that. And no one has a plan to get out of it. No one has a plan to get out of it that we have heard of yet. You know, Pelosi shut down that second stimulus package. Heard of pushing there $25 trillion for $25 million for the Kennedy Center and some other things, which mounted up to about $50 million, and $560 million for your legal aliens and illegal people who are here in the United States who aren't supposed to be, that now have access to our treasury. I mean, we can't even take care of our own homeless, for God's sakes, and elderly, and get people proper medicine because of the pharmaceuticals are too expensive. We also can't get them, you know, a lot of proper medical coverage, but yet, you know, Pelosi forced down the throats of everyone that has nothing to do with the coronavirus, $560 trillion in order for her to be able to take care of people who shouldn't be here in the first place. I mean, it sounds horrible, but when you're talking about thousands of people that are now dying from this virus, they should have kept up with what was supposed to be going on. So on one personal level, the debt burdens are far beyond what could have been imagined 90 years ago. Student debt, well over $1 trillion. Credit card debt approaching, it's probably over $1 trillion as well. I know it was $950 billion the last time I heard. Mortgages, car loans, etc. For example, the United States, some 60% of Americans have less than $1,000 in their savings, and 40% don't have $400 to cover unexpected expenses. So could you imagine what's actually happening now during this crisis? It is unbelievable. And with 78% of the workers living paycheck to paycheck, 78% of the workers, they're living paycheck to paycheck, now out of work as a result of government closing down businesses across the nation, they are going into the Great Depression much deeper, already deep in debt. Now, the United States have now recorded a record-breaking, I believe it was 6.6 million people that filed for unemployment within the last month, right? Canada is up there as well. I mean, a lot of people are unemployed up there as they're following the same suit. I mean, this same suit's happening all around the world. And in a world with 7.7 billion people, as we go to the press, some 7,866 people have died from the coronavirus at this point. Right, so I think it's like about 10,000 now. I think today, as of today of this show, there's about 10,000 people that have died around the world. In the United States, the population is 327 million, and so far, about 1,000 people have died from the coronavirus. According to reports, almost everyone who comes down with the virus experience only mild symptoms such as fever and cough, and recover fully. As evidenced by the 22 deaths in Kirkland, West Virginia, the highest number in any U.S. city at that time, the vast majority were elderly residents and of nursing homes who were already suffering from the chronic health problems. But we far surpassed that now. New York is now the epicenter, which New Orleans is coming up very quickly. They just had a big giant outbreak in that. I believe Washington, D.C. just had a big giant outbreak. And so Virginia wants to shut things down completely on Long Island. Nassau County now has over 10,000 confirmed cases. Suffolk County now has over 7 confirmed cases, with New York City having about 22,000 or so. California has, I think they have like about maybe, 15,000 cases or something like that. But it's getting really crazy out there. And so we need to really, really understand where a lot of this is going as we're practicing this social distancing, as we're practicing all of this stuff. So it is insane us to understand uh, what type of impact this is actually going to have on the whole entire world. Now, this is the reason why, as we get into why the coming recession or the coming depression could force the Federal Reserve to swap greenbacks for digital dollars, which in turn the whole entire world would pretty much follow suit. This is the reason why, a lot of that talk about decolonization was happening in the Aboriginal indigenous community here in North America, in order for them to be able to have a system where they didn't have to deal with all the things that are going on. But that is, another conversation for another day. And the Aboriginal indigenous people, as well as every other race of beings, are going to have to deal with what's happening right now, because they have no choice but to rely on the governments that they are a part of to help them maneuver and get through the situation. Well, the Federal Reserve, as we know, has nothing to do with the federal department, has nothing to do with the Treasury, has nothing to do with any kind of federal government office at all, right? It's an independent private banking system that provides to governments. It is the old Templar system. That's what the Templar system was based on, basically, when you begin to start getting that. So, so paper banknotes right now are being upgraded for a digital future around the entire world. And I know Korea has already experimented on things like that. China's looking into doing that. So is Brazil, as they're looking at their own type of Bitcoin. It is going to be an interesting situation on how they're going to be able to get rid of this and bamboozle people out of the rest of their money. So, it's important for us to understand that, this is, I don't call it a new normal, but I call it what they really wanted to do. So the Federal Reserve has never been more famous than it is today, because everybody now knows it. It drew praise, and it also drew some ire for its handling of the financial crisis a decade ago. A decade ago was 2008, 2009. And the extraordinary measures it took subsequently to stimulate the U.S. economy have made it an important driver of financial markets. Meanwhile, President Trump has made its chairman, Jerome Powell, a household name by frequently criticizing the central bank policies on Twitter and to the press. Fake news, as he calls them, right? A movement, meanwhile, has been brewing among the economists, financial service professionals, and central bankers to encourage the rethinking of technology of the currency. Now, we talked about this digital currency a little while ago. We were talking about how Germany, I think it's Germany, South Africa, Russia, China, India, Brazil, Venezuela, and Iran, I believe, also, and a few other African countries were looking to formulate their own digital currency to be able to transfer funds around the world and getting them off what they call the SWIFT system. So a movement, meanwhile, has been brewing among the economists, financial services professionals, and central bankers to encourage a rethinking of the technology of currency. For those paper notes we carry in our wallets, with an eye towards issuing a digital currency. Some argue that that could give central banks the tools necessary to break free of chronic deflation and persistently low or negative interest rates, while providing Americans a risk-free means of transaction in a world where digital currencies constitute a growing share of the economy. So here we haven't really had too much negative currency, but Europe has experienced an awful lot. Japan has been in negative currency for God only knows how long, since their economy fell to crap back in the 80s. So the Americans have already used digital currency for the most part. In 2018, they used physical dollars for just 26% of the transactions. See, the programming has already been going on in there to get you into this new paradigm that they're coming up with, right? So, verse 62% with digital currency, which includes credit cards, debit cards, and bank transfers, according to the Fed, right? So the debate isn't about whether we need a digital currency. Now, that's according to Michael Burdo, an economicist at Rutgers University and a fellow at Hoover Institution. He says that the policy rethink tank at Stanford University told MarketWatch it's about how you do it. So now that we have already established the fact that most of the population is already using digital currency through their credit cards, debit cards, etc. The central bank digital currency could work much like most bank-issued digital money Americans use today. So now they're calling it digital money, right? Because that digital money actually at any particular time you can go there and get real cash for your money. But then when you think about it, that real cash is no longer backed by the gold standard. That ended back in the 70s with Nixon. It's backed by what they call the oil dollar, right? It's an oil dollar, and that currency has been swiped away because that 50-year deal that they had with that ended in 2019, I believe it was. So now the currency is really, it's really backed on just reputation alone. And yeah, it's just backed on, differences alone. So the central banking currency, they feel could work, much like the bank-issued digital money Americans use today, with some key differences. First, it would be backed by the faithful of the credit of the United States government and therefore risk-free. Now, you get into your birth certificate and how every single person is born as a means for the United States to use them, to use that body as a means of having a credit on them to show the world that they have all of this. They have the more bodies they have, the more credit they have because of the people that they have underneath them, right? So the local bank that manages your savings account could fail at any time, and the dollar in your account beyond those insured by the FDIC, which I believe is through $250,000, would just disappear. A Fed e-dollar, though, would persist as long as the U.S. government does. So as long as the United States survives, or as long as Canada survives, as long as Mexico survives, as long as the British survive, the EU or the Euro, as long as China or Russia, any of you, wherever you are in those particular countries that's hearing this program, if they go on a Fed e-dollar, that dollar is good as long as your country is a viable country on this planet. So more important, an e-dollar could pay interest. The idea that cash should pay interest dates back to the monetary economist Milton Friedman, right? Friedman, who argued in 1969 that the most efficient monetary system would be one in which cash bears interest equal to that short-term government bonds to encourage greater use of the dollar. So this is really getting pretty interesting because in good times, earning interest on your would make everyone a little richer. But in times of crisis, it could also be used to institute negative interest rates, essentially a tax on holding cash. Such a policy would likely strike Americans as governmental overreach, and Bordeaux agrees the alternative is worse, right? So the alternative is worse, as they say, right? This is, it's pretty crazy, but the fact that they have these situations already in use, and they can put this in just at a simple program going in, and don't have to really change much of anything. They can wipe out these $1 trillion debts, in no time. So what do they really have in store for you? The central bank ammunition, the current economic expansion is the biggest, and they're talking about in the U.S. history. Canada's also been doing pretty good. Mexico's also been on a pretty good high. I mean, the stock market itself, all around this world, has been on a pretty high. So this world expansion, really, especially in the U.S., has been the longest in the United States history. But warning signs of a recession abound, including slow economic growth and the recent inversion of the yield curve for the U.S. government debt. In response, the Fed Reserve reduced interest rates in July and hinted at more cuts to come. Now, you got to remember, when they're reducing these interest rates, they're reducing it from like less than 1%, right? But the economists worry that the Fed will not have enough ammunition to fight the next downturn, as the central banks has typically had to cut rates by at least 5 percentage points to stimulate the economy and the recession. Because the Fed, as I remind you, has kept interest rates down for almost 10 years now, since the last downturn, which was in 2007, 2008, 2009. They have kept it way down. So the interest rates always is around 3%, and then now is down to 1%. Now it's down to like a percentage of 0.58% or something like that. So the Fed may be forced to restart its program of quantitative easing or the purchase of long-term government debt to push down long-term interest rates, though there is a growing concern that this is an effective tool, right? Take a look at Japan, which has been mirrored in decades of economic crisis. So as we talked about before, right, interest rates there have been stuck near zero for almost 20 years, despite a massive program of government bond buying, and has led to the Bank of Japan's owing more than 40% of Japan's government debt. It has still suffered 4 recessions over the past 20 years, and this is like recurring. This is just what the economy is now. Our economy now is basically the same when you talk about, Canada did really well in the last recession. They were probably the only country on earth that actually really survived the recession really well. Now with all of their liberal spending, if this thing does go into the tank, which looks like it has to, they may not fare as well either. Remember, they only have about 33 to 40 million people total in the whole entire country. So the Eurozone hasn't fared much better despite imposing negative interest rates on large banks, as it suffered 2 recent recessions since the financial crisis. So we talked about that a little bit. Europe has really been bad with their economies for a very long time. I mean, they haven't really, with their immigration problems, and a lot of the violence that are coming over there with all the immigrations and the open borders and all that other type stuff, they're barely sitting afloat. This is one of the reasons why Britain wanted to try to get out of there, so they can probably try to save their own skin. But that economist, Barodo, said the problem with negative rates in Europe and Japan is that without a central bank digital currency held by the public at large, those rates can only be imposed on banks, which hurt banks. The ability to lend and does little to encourage the magnitude of spending needed to jolt economies back to normal levels of growth. So, I mean, now what's happening is, you got to look at this. This is just insane and just really crazy. Just insane and really crazy, okay? Now they're talking about, we really don't want to penalize the banks. The banks are being penalized because they're kind of stuck in a corner. They can only penalize themselves if they want to try to get out of the situation, because they can only lend to themselves and they can only lend to people. What people won't be really crushed by, right? So this way, if they have a digital currency, they can leverage, and that's what the birth certificate is all about. They have the leverage to be able to say that we have these people backing this currency, right? So they're able to leverage their people and not this government institutions in order for them to be able to get themselves out of debt. So the people will begin to start carrying debt and having to pay for it, because once it goes into negative debt, it's not just the bondholders, it's anyone that's carrying the digital currency that's going to be affected by it. Case in point, right now you may have a bond. Bond might be worth, 1.2%, right? If it goes to negative 0.1%, those who are carrying the bonds have to pay to keep the have money in a savings account or checking account. If the interest rate goes into the negative, the bank would then start charging you to keep the money in the bank, right? Because the Federal Reserve is charging people to be able to hold on to their money. So you can easily take your money out of the bank and say, I'm not paying those interest rates. I don't just want my money in there. I'll just use cash, right? So once they go to the digital currency, they got you. They got you once, twice, and 3 times, and 4 times over, because now you can't just say, I'm taking my money out of a bank. You can't go and try to shop around banks. You can't do anything to try to get away from it, because now they got you in a digital situation where everybody is in, and they can just take money from you at any particular time. Plus, they can devalue your money or raise the value of your money any particular time as well. So the U.S. economy could soon face some situation, Bill said. We could be in a situation like Japan, he said. The way things are going in the world, where growth is slowing and deflationary pressure persists, we probably are headed in that direction. So it's really crazy when you think about what is really happening, because you thought about this for years. You hear it in the church, about all these downtimes, about, global pandemics, earthquakes. And earthquakes are still happening, by the way. There was one in, I believe it was in Idaho. It was 6.5 megahertz earthquake, which is pretty large, right? And it's over there in a very sensitive part of the world. But there's a lot of things that are going on. But the thing is that we've all really looked at all this stuff about what's been going on all this time. And, for years, we never really thought about how it was going to work. Some people thought it would just be all-out martial law. People were going to, be snatched out of their homes and put in the FEMA camps, or, there's going to be an invasion coming from the east, the west, or the south, or something like that, and, be foreign troops on the ground. But nobody really, how would a pandemic look, and, would it really even be possible? Nobody, really thought about those kinds of things, because they always had our heads looking in someplace else. Although they tried very, very often to try to put a pandemic out there. I mean, you had the SARS, you had that pig virus that was going around. You also had, Ebola, a lot of the stuff that's always been going around. But we never really thought that something like this would happen to such an extent as to where we would be forced through fear. We always knew fear would be involved, but forced through fear to have us manipulated into a whole new system without thinking that something had went terribly wrong. It's crazy. So how would it work? The Federal Reserve already issues digital dollars. Did you know that? Right? I didn't before I started looking at this. I thought that they, weren't really in that game, but apparently they are. So there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, but only banks can use them. That's interesting, huh? They call them bank reserves, and from digital currency received a great deal of attention over the past decade for its role in the Fed's quantitative easing program. With the Fed buying government bonds from banks and giving them newly created digital bank reserves, in return, banks can settle debts among themselves using digital currency. That is crazy. It never calculates in the consumer banking system. Like, can you imagine that? You can just go and say, I got such and such digital currency, and I can pay you off a couple of $1 billion, and everything's fine. And all they're doing is just switching around calculated numbers in a computer system. One way the Fed could implement the e-dollar is by simply allowing any American to open an account at the Federal Reserve. Now, this could possibly be any account at the Federal Reserve. It could be any account that is governed or that is approved by the Federal Reserve. Now the banking system is becoming a Federal Reserve, private Federal Reserve banking system, which now we're going into a really different system. So if the Federal Reserve approves the bank to accept the e-dollar, they can offer you your account in e-dollars, and you don't have to really do a thing, you know, where other forms of money, like a check from an employer or a deposit from a private bank, could be exchanged in e-dollars. So, you know, the possibility of you getting a check ever again after this is minimal. Everyone is going to have an e-account, so to speak, right? Or else you won't be able to do anything. So this is really crazy, because we're getting into a situation where it's possible that if you do not accept, you know, an e-account, you may not be able to do any commerce on the face of this earth, which is insane, right? So the only way we can transact with a central bank money today is to use reserve notes. But digital payments are now the norm. One, Asami Jacobs Mending, an economist at London School of Economics, who spent much of the past 2 decades working on financial institutions, including credit issues, and UBS. If you want to buy something on Amazon, you can pay with central bank money. Shouldn't central banks say that our money can be used in the environment? It's easy, practical issue to the public choice. So in essence, in other words, what they're saying, again, we're already using the system. Meanwhile, an e-dollar system could be engineered so that the payments are nearly instantaneous and costless. Mendez says the world would be a major upgrade, or this would be a major upgrade for many Americans who now pay hefty fees for wiring transfers. Newer payments, such services as Venmo and Google Wallet, meanwhile, rely on automated clearinghouses or HCH exchanges that often take days to process money in tenders. I send money up to Canada every now and then, and, you know, depending upon if I'm sending it Western Union, they'll take a big hunk of change out of the money that I'm sending up there, but I can get it there right away. If I wire it in any kind of way, they still take some money out, and it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 days for it to get into the other person's bank account, right? So a concern among economists is that the proposal for banking accounts could erode private banks' profitability and therefore reduce the flow of credit they provide to business and customers. And we were talking about that, right? As others argue that the banks would simply change their business models and could attract depositors by offering higher interest rates and cash would or by offering discounts on loans and other service consumers while maintaining certain balance. And again, we all go back to, you know, it's the old money, you know, if I can have more money to spend, you know, they can convince me to do anything. And it's like selling your soul, you know, to a system by giving up all the freedom that you have. Because once we buy into this e-dollar system, once we buy into this e-dollar banking system that is going to be controlled by a private Federal Reserve banking system, worldwide currency banking system, we will now lose control over our complete economics and our government, because our governments have no control over the economic system whatsoever, right? But given the risk that the e-dollar could significantly harm the banking system, proponents of the central banking digital currency say that the safest approach would be to allow supervised commercial banks. Supervised commercial banks. Who's supervising them? Who's supervising these commercial banks to offer specially designated accounts for it? So, I mean, we are getting into a real serious situation While the regional federal banks have produced research that points to significant economic benefits from the central bank's digital currency, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors declined to comment on this story. In addition, the board's public comments have revealed a skepticism on the potential benefits to consumers. So that means that it's already said and done, and that they are going to do whatever needs to be done to help make this situation go in the way of new. Now, you know, this COVID-19 thing is pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. I mean, we've never seen anything like this in our particular human history ever. In terms of this crashing of economies and people being confined to their homes. I have to use the word confined because it's no longer really voluntary, because a lot of people who are caught out in the streets in some of these towns and stuff like that can face 6 years in imprisonment and a hefty, a year in imprisonment and a $5,000 fine. So whatever money that you're going to get back in this, $1 trillion situation that they're giving the people, you might lose it all by having to pay a fine in order for you to keep yourself out of jail, or as you're coming out of jail. So it's crazy. This COVID-19 and the forced destruction of our world economy, which it is a forced destruction of the world economy, because you heard Governor Cuomo, who's up there every day, he's talking about how, everybody needs to do this, that, or the other thing. Governor Cuomo is the governor of New York. And then he admitted, he said, perhaps maybe this wasn't the wisest thing for us to do, to tell everybody to stay in the house. Perhaps he was right. But they are still, doing it. My thoughts, again, and some people say it's really conspiracy. I think that they were intending, maybe the global powers or something like that, were intending to do something like this anyway, but the wrong people are in political power to pull it off. So I believe that there's a huge fight behind the scenes, which you can, you can kind of tell, because Trump has made some digs stating that the deep state, is being dealt with. If you listen to these press conferences, you'll hear a lot of things. And the other thing is that he had put a moratorium on anything dealing with the Real ID system, which is actually really the Agenda 21 global ID system that was supposed to be ready by October 2020. And once October 2020 came, every person on the face of the earth had to have this so-called Real ID so that they could be in the facial recognition system around the globe. So he put a stop to that. So that's major. So there's a lot of interesting things that are going on, which me as a political scientist is hard for me to really gauge and put into perspective. But we're going to be looking at this. And we're going to be looking at this very hard, and we're going to be having a lot more programs dealing with the economic situations that the world is going to be facing and is facing. Because when you're talking about the United States now and over $26 to $28 trillion in hard debt, over $150 trillion in promised debt, and growing. And now with Pelosi adding in $560 million and taking care of people who don't even really belong getting anything out of the Treasury, we have a serious problem with our growing homeless population. We now have 6.6 million people out of work, and I'm sure once this really starts to really get back in the back in the hole, there's a lot of people going to be back to work immediately, hopefully, because a lot of these people are being quote unquote furloughed. But again, you have to remember that this is just the beginning. This is really, really just the beginning, and there's a lot more to come. So, we have to really say that, we do have, very well heartfelt feelings and condolences for all of those that have known somebody, felt somebody, or that is experiencing and have gone through this COVID-19 situation and has similarly passed away from it. So, we really do put our hearts out there, and our prayers go with each and every family. And our prayers go with each and every person that is in every single one of these countries around the world, because we really don't want anybody being affected as much as they're being affected, right now. So our hearts goes out to Italy, the people over there in New York. Our heart goes out to the people in other parts of China, India, people down there in Australia, especially when they went through all this fire stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's happening on this earth right now that is going in and looking for a way for their Federal Reserve to put in a new economic currency called the e-dollar. I mean, here we were looking at the Canadian, U.S. Mexican dollar, the Bolero. I think that's what it was called. But I think that's going to be out the window. I think they found a better way now, in combining the system and creating this digital currency. It is extremely important for us to understand that, we are in this together, but it's going to take each and every one of us really to work on our souls to be able to really think our way out of this. So, hold your political leaders to the fire, make calls, vote them out of office, do whatever you need to do in order for us to be able to get through this whole entire thing. And right now, I tell you, the most important thing I do say as a political scientist, if you are able to vote, wherever you are, no matter what country you're in, make sure you're voting for someone who can pass this litmus test. Do they care about humans? Do they care about humans? And if they care about humans with their policy. If they care about GMOs more so than they care about you, which was, again, I hate to bring up the Obama administration, but a lot of it on the Obama administration went to protect a lot of those companies that were producing GMOs. You can't even sue them. And if you even bring up a lawsuit, you can be sued. In fact, what happened in Canada when I was up there dealing with some of the agricultural stuff, we're finding out that a lot of these GMO sites that were growing a lot of the corn and stuff like that, their corn was being pollinated by bees, and their bees were going to pollinate other flowers and other farms. Those farms were found to be carrying some of the GMO crossbreeding by the bees, and those farms were sued and taken out of business. It is crazy, insane. So when we're looking at a lot of this digital currency stuff, this COVID-19 doesn't stop with COVID-19, because you got to remember again that pig Ebola killed over 1 billion pigs on the earth, and it's still going, right? That our yield in the breadbasket of the United States in terms of our corn and wheat and et cetera has been the lowest in the past 30 years, right? So, and then we're suffering a lot of clean water shortages with just about, I think it's almost 100% now, utility that is owned by a private corporation. Canada still is again, great shape up there, because I think less than 2% of their utilities are owned by private corporations. But down here, all of the private corporations own the water sources pretty much for the country. It is crazy. I'll check my numbers again on that to make sure that I'm right. But I'm pretty sure water is owned by corporations, and then they're taking all the water, a lot of the water out of the Great Lakes. Is that those Great Lakes are, dipping, I think, 1 or 2 inches a year or something like that, and a lot of that water was going over to China to pay off the Chinese debt. So there's a lot of things that are going on. But here at Dark Matter Radio, we're going to keep up with all of this. I'm glad that you guys are here. Go over to Our New Thunder on YouTube and subscribe on that. We have set up a BitChute thing, and contact us through our website, and we'll give you the private thing for BitChute as well. And we're also strengthening our Patreon page to make sure that we can get whatever programming we really need to get out there and be able to see what we need to say, is able to get to our private Patreon listeners, and you can really get the information that you need. So this is Ronnie McLean, political scientist. Glad that you guys are here. Glad that you are listening, and I'm glad that everybody, we're just praying that you're okay at this time. We're just glad that you're okay at this time, and thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. This is Ronnie McLean, the political scientist, and till next time. Have a great day. Great grand rising to us all.